Hi Ron, Chris here with a camera comparison between the new Vivo X100 Ultra, the Huawei Pura 70 Ultra, and the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. So that's three Ultras, and we should be expecting some good results then, since they are named Ultra phones, right? So front-facing cameras here, this is 4K 60 frames per second. I'm swapping over the audio sources. There is a light breeze, so we may possibly hear a little bit of wind noise, but it's a good test of those microphones. All phones are on the latest firmware, and I am cleaning the lenses to make sure there's no smudges on them. So short jog ahead, testing out electronic image stabilization, which they are all using with their front-facing cameras. 4K 60 frames per second with all three of them, their main cameras at the moment, and I haven't seen any focus troubles with them at all. But what I noticed with Vivo in the past, that with video they would sometimes have focus issues, and I do have focus issues with the X100 Pro at times. It does seem better now with the new sensor with the X100 Ultra right now. Now I'm going to swap over to the ultra wide cameras just for a second. Okay, those have electronic image stabilization. Which do you think looks the steadiest? Now there's a tiny bit of a breeze. We shouldn't really have any wind noise. We should be able to hear those waves really well. Just going to pan around slowly, no dropped frames, hopefully. And back to the main cameras now. The reason is I want to do a bit of a stability test here. Just jog down here. And they are all looking quite steady. But I have noticed that in the past, Vivo and Huawei, their weaknesses have been video. Optical zoom cameras. Now this is 10 times video, just looking at the rocky coast here in Las Rodas. It's a place called Denia in Spain. Las Rodas is the location here on the coast. And I'm looking at this sailing ship, trying to get it on all three at the same time is proving to be very difficult. But which one looks the best here and the steadiest at 10 times, which is a combination of both optical and digital zoom. Rare 4K video, but this time at 30 frames per second, not 60, which is better. The 30 frames per second in low light conditions, it tends to fare a little bit better, I've noticed. So stabilization not looking good as daylight here, and as I pan around, I'm going to stop walking here and just pan around slowly. We shouldn't see any drop frames. What about the night sky? How has that been handled across all three of these Ultra phones? Daytime stills now, so bright red hibiscus flower in direct sunlight is very, very difficult to capture. The reds, they have clipped across all three. There's a little bit of, I think, a tad overexposed with the Huawei. For me, now it's all subjective, I believe it's the X100 Ultra that has the best looking photo here. The background blur, the details captured, the sharpness, and second place, this S24 Ultra. Macro photos, or super macro as Vivo and Huawei like to call them. Now you can see that straight away the Huawei has the most details. It captures the different shades of red, whereas I think the Vivo here is oversaturated despite using the Zeiss natural mode. The Huawei is set to original color, and Samsung, well, it's also oversaturated and there's no option. It's just the normal setting I'm using, the default there. So it's the Huawei that's the best at the macro shots. You can even zoom in closer than this, which I didn't here. Main sensors now. So we've got the two 50 megapixel 1-inch type sensors versus the 200 megapixels from Samsung. Now all three at first glance look really good. The more realistic colors are the Huawei here. I did notice that even though, again, on the natural preset from the Zeiss options optimization, the Vivo, it kind of kills a little bit some of the details in the blacks. It's a tiny bit oversaturated. It's the Huawei, it's more true to life. Samsung's also very good here, but I think it's the Pura 70 Ultra, at least for me here. Ultra wide shots yet again, they all look very similar, apart from the Zeiss optimization is just not quite right here with the ultra wide camera. Note that the Vivo and the Samsung, they are over sharpening. Don't confuse that for extra detail. I prefer the Pura 70 Ultra with the ultra wide shot, at least this one. Very close yet again here. Now, color-wise, they are similar, a little bit more contrast with the Samsung. The details, well, I think it's the Vivo that has the most detail here. a little bit over sharpened. Samsung's a little over sharpened, sharpening a little less with the Huawei, but because of those extra details I'm seeing, especially with the window shutters there, it's the Vivo that gets the win. Indoors with a very difficult HDR shot. Straight away, the Samsung's in last place for me because look at the left window. It didn't capture hardly anything. Outside there, there's quite a bit of noise to the image. So between the Huawei and our Vivo, very close. The Vivo has the more accurate colors here. This time, the Zeiss natural profile pulling through. Both of them have a tiny little bit of noise, details, contrast, and what we see in the shadows. Overall, I think it's a bit of a draw, really, between the Huawei and the Vivo. Then the zoom cameras. I don't get everyone's obsession with having zoom shots at like 30 times, 50 times. Anything over about 10 times does not really look that good. And this is a perfect example. 30 times zoom right now, mostly digital. All three of them are not good. The worst is the Samsung. I think that looks terrible. It's just over sharpened and it looks a little bit artificial. Perhaps even almost using AI or something there. And then with the Huawei, a little bit too much contrast, still blurry. The Vivo's blurry, but at 10 times, okay, now we have a usable photo for social media. The Samsung, over sharpened. The Huawei, it's okay, but a little bit too much contrast. We're losing some details in the shadows. The best is probably the Vivo there, I think, out of these three. Now, there was no point me showing more zoom shots because it's the same story every single time. It will be the Vivo that's best at zoom. So portrait photos, all three of them looking decent. The stitching on the Samsung and the Huawei isn't quite as good as the Vivo's, a little bit more natural. Skin tones, the Vivo with the Zeiss profile is more realistic here. Huawei did a good job. You can see the background blur on that one is a lot more, just simulating like a very low aperture there. The Samsung, also decent. Skin tones look good, but I think it's the Vivo that gets this one. Now, it's very difficult. All those strands are here everywhere with my daughter, but I did an okay job here with some of those strands being shown and not cut off as much as, say, the Huawei or the Samsung. Portrait photos of animals isn't something you should normally try because it doesn't work that well. You can see with the Samsung, absolute failure. I mean, it blurred Vera's eye. It cut out all around her fur. It just looks like it's terrible. It's not good at all. The Huawei handled this the best because look at the finer little furs just around where her shoulders are and around her ears and her eyes and things, and the whiskers. Very good job. Second would have to be the Vivo. Selfies. Unfortunately, I had the Vivo in the portrait mode by mistake and the lighting conditions have changed, so I can't just redo the test. But it is clear that with all the selfies, the details are good. I think skin tones do come through a little bit better with the Samsung S24 Ultra versus the other two, which sometimes apply a tiny bit of like skin smoothing, even though beautifying options are off. As for low light, you can see that the Vivo here is the best of these three. Something's going on with the Huawei. They need a firmware update. There's this green tint coming through in all the low light photos. Zoom cameras now in low light. All three are terrible, but it's the Vivo that's the worst with the sky. The Huawei gets the win here. And then another low light shot at a bright light. Now this is where that Zeiss T-Star coating comes into play here. Fantastic. Won this shot here out of the three. Again, the Huawei with that weird green. It's really obvious here. And then this shot, again, something going on with the green tint with the Huawei. The Galaxy S24 Ultra is very good, but not quite there compared to the Vivo, which I think is the best out of all of the low light photos I've been taking. Then my findings here. I found that the video during daytime, definitely the Samsung was the best. Dropped the least amount of frames. It was more fluid, details, and just overall had the best stabilization. Both optical, electronic was the better there. However, in low light with video, things changed. The Vivo was terrible, dropped frames. The Huawei was the best and the Samsung was the worst in low light video. Audio quality, the best microphones, hands down, Samsung won that. Second place, Huawei. Third, Vivo. Daytime stills, I found that went to the Vivo. Macro shots, Huawei captured the most details, and that seems to happen every time I test it out. Shots with the Vivo were a little bit oversaturated when it came to the super macros. Selfies, very kind of similar, but Samsung was the best there for me. And ultra wide, well, a little disappointing. The Samsung with the over sharpening wasn't great to see. I think Huawei had the best daytime ultra wides. However, ultra wide video is horrendous with the Huawei. They really need to improve upon their video quality. And then that brings me to low light, which went to the Vivo. So do you agree with my findings here? Please let me know. Remember, it's subjective, and I do hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.